Hey guys, this is Miss Sims. So this is the last part of section 2. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties yesterday, which really just means that I forgot to press record. And so I recorded like a 30-minute lecture to my plants in my living room. So I was just wore out yesterday, so I didn't feel like doing it again. So today will be the second half of this. So the work that you did yesterday, like the beginning of part 2, you're just going to finish up part 2 today, and you'll turn in both of those parts today. It's one fill in the blank notes. It's 2 different videos. Sorry, I just didn't feel like videoing the whole thing, so I just did 20 minutes yesterday, and I'll finish it up today. Okay, so if you guys remember, kind of the last thing that we talked about was Selma was a push to work towards voting rights. And as a result, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is passed, and that does a lot for voting rights, okay? And so we see that was where the breaking point kind of was, the tension between whether nonviolence is actually working or not, or whether they need to take a different approach. And so we're seeing that, especially the younger generation, because remember, King has been doing this for like 10 years, and there's a lot of other people that have been involved as well. The younger folks start to question, like, is this really working? It has done some things in the past. So desegregating like public buses, and desegregating like public like stores, getting voting rights, those things were really positive. But things like poverty, those are a lot trickier, and so that hasn't really been touched, and that issue of poverty is affecting the majority of African Americans. So at this point, activists are starting to move towards what we would call a more militant style, and there's still some people that are not going that direction, but the trend in general is moving that way. And King is still around, but he's not as relevant or as influential as he was before Selma. Selma was kind of the period where he started to lose a little bit of popularity, okay? And I don't know if you guys remember, I told you, if we're looking at this picture right here, this is King right here, and this young man his name is Stokely Carmichael. He is marching with King, but he is going to later in the next couple years go on to help form the ideas that are going to make the Black Panther Party, which is going to be a more militant approach to civil rights. Okay, all right, so now we have to kind of go back in history. So a lot of people think that like Martin Luther King happened, then he was assassinated, and then you've got Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and then you've got Black Panthers. That's not really the way it worked. Malcolm X and King are kind of doing their thing at the same time. That's just not usually the way that we talk about it in history. So to kind of start, we've got to go back to the person that influenced Malcolm X. So that's kind of who we're going to talk about now. So Malcolm X had a really rough upbringing. He just had a really hard life, and he ended up being in jail at a pretty young age. And when he was in jail, he ended up meeting this mentor whose name was Elijah Muhammad, who was kind of a leader in the Nation of Islam. Okay, so he is a Muslim. Malcolm X follows him and learns a lot from him. And then whenever Malcolm X gets out of prison, he's going to join the Nation of Islam and become a very influential leader in that. Okay, all of these ideas are going to be built on the ideas of Marcus Garvey. I don't know if you guys remember what we talked about. Booker T. Washington, and then W.E.B. Du Bois, and then we talked about Marcus Garvey. So Marcus Garvey was the guy who pushed for Black pride, that Black people needed a nation of their own, and kind of rejected integration. So this idea that separating Black and white is a bad thing is not something that we're going to see the Nation of Islam or even Marcus Garvey kind of think about. They do think that the inequality of the separation is a problem, but the fact that they're separate, they don't have a problem with that. Okay, and we're going to see with the Nation of Islam, there's going to be a great distrust between the Nation of Islam and white folks, and they even called white folks blue-eyed devils. So there is no like push for integration. That's different for the Nation of Islam. Okay. All right. So Malcolm X, a lot of people think that he is like way against integration, that he was way for Black power, and he was in the beginning, but some events ended up happening. He ended up having a falling out with his mentor, Elijah Muhammad, who had not been honest about a lot of stuff and was hiding stuff, and there was a lot of hypocrisy in his life. And Malcolm X was believed that you should follow kind of the straight and narrow a little bit more. So what's going to happen is Malcolm X is going to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Basically, it's one of like the rules that if you're able, you should go back to Mecca, which is the homeland where they believe that the Prophet Muhammad kind of received this prophecy from Allah. Okay, so Malcolm X steps away from the Nation of Islam, and whenever he goes to Mecca, he meets a lot of other Muslims from all across the world, and he starts to understand that true Islam does not fight against integration, that it's a more peaceful movement. And so whenever he comes back, he's going to start to fight for integration. He's going to found the Afro-American Unity and support nonviolent protests. Now, he does communicate with King some, but he's still not a king. He's still a man who believes that Black men should stand up for themselves, but he changes from who he was to begin with. Either way, he is assassinated, and before he's assassinated, he's going to influence other leaders like Stokely Carmichael, the man that we just saw in the picture with King. But most people do not remember the Malcolm X after he comes back from Mecca. They remember the Malcolm X before that, okay? And a lot of people believe that Malcolm X was actually assassinated by the Nation of Islam because he was kind of going against them. So there's a lot of different conspiracy things, so we won't get deep into that. But if you're interested, that's something you can research later on. Okay. All right. So Stokely Carmichael, so remember he's the man in the picture with King. This is him here in this slide. He started out in SNCC. So that SNCC was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So they were the group that was working grassroots, meaning that they were working on the ground with local people at Selma. Okay, so they're students, they tend to be younger. That's where he started out. And then he's going to go from there to write a book on Black power. And the focus of the book is militancy, self-reliance, independence, and nationalism. And this idea of nationalism just basically means that Black people should have a nation of their own and they should control that. Okay, and so that is going to turn into the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Okay, so this is happening in Oakland, California. It's inspired by Stokely Carmichael's book, which was inspired by Malcolm X. Okay, at this point, Malcolm X has been assassinated, so that's kind of where we're at. The Black Panther Party is going to demand immediate equality for Blacks. They are not willing to wait. They feel like they have waited long enough. They want better employment opportunity. They want exemption for Black men from serving in the draft for Vietnam because they feel, well, and this is not a feel like, this is a fact. Black men made up about 10%, or African Americans made up about 10% of the population during this time period, and they're going to make up way more than that in the casualties in Vietnam. So what we're going to see is that poor Blacks and poor whites, but mostly poor Blacks, are going to be drafted at a higher rate than other people in the United States. They're going to be put in more dangerous situations and are going to die at a higher rate, yet are not going to get full equality from the country that is calling them to their death. And so that they've got a real problem with Vietnam. Better access to healthcare, better education services. At this time, even though Brown versus Board has been passed, there are still many, many schools in the South which have not been desegregated, including the schools in North Carolina. Okay, Malcolm X had merely preached this idea of revolution, whereas the Black Panther Party is actually going to prepare and patrol these California, Oakland neighborhoods, looking for racial violence against Blacks and stepping into act. Okay, they also, so that part of them is kind of known, but they're also operating education centers, free breakfast centers, healthcare clinics in in their communities, and so that's something that is not known quite as well. Okay, their approach and their style is going to alienate and make some white Northerners afraid. And we're going to see that at this point, we're going to see the federal government is kind of tired of dealing with civil rights anyway. So this is kind of an excuse for them to crack down on the Black Panther Party. And we're going to see some pretty messed up stuff happen, including a raid on one of the houses where a lot of the Black Panther Party leadership is going to end up being killed by, I can't remember if it's police or if it's the CIA or the FBI. I can't remember at this point. But anyways, it effectively, the party is going to fall apart because everyone that's in leadership either dies or is arrested. So that's kind of where we're at. So whenever you think about the Black Panther Party, you can't just think about these top two pictures, Black men with guns. You have to also look at they were the ones providing food. They were the ones providing tutoring programs, free healthcare clinics to their community. And so it's both. Both parts of it are there, okay? Okay, we're going to skip the Watts riots. Basically, that's a civil rights riot that's happening in California. We're going to skip that. Okay, so 1968, King is going to be assassinated. So at this point, 1968, this is kind of the height of the Black Power movement, the Black militancy movement. But King has continued to fight for equality for Black people in a nonviolent way. Okay, the older generation in the African American community and even in the white community in the North to a certain extent are still in favor of King, but we're going to see that young people are not going to follow him quite as much. Okay, he was in Tennessee. They were doing a march for sanitation workers, and he's going to be shot by a high-powered rifle on his motel balcony. Okay, James Earl Ray is the man who assassinated him. 10 years later, there's going to be a congressional hearing, and basically what's going to happen is they're going to realize that there were probably other people involved. It probably wasn't just James Earl Ray. Other people were organized in it. There's a lot of different stuff that we just don't have time to talk about. Like the FBI followed King all the time. Like there's literal records that show when King goes to the bathroom. They knew. They wrote it down. So people are skeptical that the FBI didn't know that there were like viable threats to King. Could they have stopped it? Could they have not? I don't know. There's a lot of different questions surrounding this. But either way, James Earl Ray was arrested, but there were no other arrests made. And that did not sit well with people. That night after King was assassinated, there's going to be thousands of protests all across the country. We're going to see thousands of people are going to attend his funeral in Atlanta. President Johnson had recently ordered the FBI to investigate King for ties to the Communist Party, is not going to attend. So there's kind of some tension there. But more than 30,000 people are going to be arrested in those protests. And those protests did not just happen like in Atlanta. Like they were going on in Raleigh, they were going on in Charlotte. Basically, at this point, a lot of people in the African American community felt like we tried nonviolence and you killed our leader. And so now nonviolence is dead and we're not going to try anymore. So now a lot of people either gave up or started supporting the militancy movement even more. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. Okay, so the end of the movement. 68, 69, with King's assassination, the movement is going to lose a lot of momentum. Part of the reason is it's been going on for a while, but the Vietnam War has also been going on for a while. And so at this point, people are just wary of dealing with the problems. They just don't want to look at it anymore. They just don't want to deal with it anymore. And especially white America doesn't have to deal with it. Like they can turn their TV off and go back to their life. It's really Black America that is stuck with the problems and a lot of the injustices. Okay. There's also going to be a lot of disagreement between these different civil rights organizations, the NAACP, SCLC, which was King's organization, SNCC, which was the Younger People, CORE, which was another group. They start to fight within each other. And then you've also got this tension from the Black Panther Party, Vietnam War. There's just a lot of different issues, and it basically just kind of fizzles out. So in the end, African Americans are left with they're left with some good legislation. So like the Voting Rights Act was really great and it did a lot of things. But the government is not going to support it. And whenever the government doesn't support it, if African Americans trying to stand up and say, hey, you're not really fulfilling your promise in these laws, people are just like, ugh, are you complaining again? And so we're going to see that a lot of promises are going to be left hollow for the African American people. And that's just kind of where we're left. So a lot was accomplished, but there's still a lot to be accomplished. And I think that we see that in our society today with a lot of questions that people still have about why is racism still continuing in the United States in ways that it's not in other countries. So anyways, that's kind of where we're left, and that kind of ends the movement. Oh. Sorry guys, my computer's slow.